watch how this develops and possibly make some adjustments depending on what we see. It's very important when these things happen to not make the knee-jerk reaction. We have inflation and jobs in focus this week, but of course the big news is the tensions in Iran. So we'll be talking a little bit about what we've seen so far this week after the news over the weekend. I'm Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group here in Bellevue, and our goal is to leave you feeling more empowered after each of these weekly updates, and hopefully take some of the market news data trends we're watching and weed out some of the noise along the way. And I wouldn't call the Iran tensions noise by any means. Obviously, it's very important and very critical to watch carefully, but it's very interesting to see how the market's reacting to that. So we're going to cover that quite a bit here in today's conversation. Before we get to that, I do want to touch on a couple of things, which is really around inflation and jobs. So just last Friday, we had PPI numbers come out, Producer Price Index, and basically the headline number was up 0.5%, which was above expectations. And the core PPI number was up 0.3%, which was below expectations. So a bit of a mixed bag there, although certainly higher numbers in general, regardless. Fast forward to this week, we kick off Jobs Week. Now, obviously, we will have the employment report tomorrow, but so far as of yesterday, we had the ADP employment report come out, shows that we added about 63,000 jobs, and this was higher than expected. You know, for those who do listen pretty frequently, you've heard me say this before, but just take this with a bit of a grain of salt. It was helpful, markets liked it, but we do have the employment report coming out tomorrow, which we will definitely want to keep an eye on as well. Before we get to the main event, so to speak, today, be sure to tune in next Thursday because we will be covering the employment report that we get tomorrow. We also get inflation again coming next week with the CPI data. So we'll be covering about that as well. Basically, jobs and inflation is the story. But of course, the main topic of this week is the tensions in Iran. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, some big news over the weekend that has been the main headline, so to speak, for the entire week and may continue to be for quite some time here too. So absolutely something to keep an eye on. And before I kind of get into it, I will share just briefly kind of what we've seen in the markets, because I think that's important to note. This week has been a lot of volatility. There's no question about it. So I think almost every day so far this week, we've seen the markets open pretty significantly lower. I think one day it actually opened higher, but we've seen quite a bit of downside at the open, and then the markets have kind of recovered. As of yesterday, so Wednesday, excuse me, at the close, believe it or not, the markets were either flat or even slightly up, even with all this concern going on over in Iran. So just wanted to kind of put that in perspective a little bit. Now today, so far markets are down. We'll see where we land as we close, but you know, it is important to keep that in mind because I think that, you know, there's a lot of headlines, there's a lot of concerns, which is totally understandable. It's right, you know, rightfully so. But in terms of the market reaction, it's been volatile, but actually pretty muted at the end of the day. Now, I think what I wanted to highlight is that this is very important to watch, though. So I don't want to downplay this by any means. I think the big concerns is what this means and if this gets bigger. And so that's what we want to continue to watch. Now, the other thing I wanted to share here is not to shy away from what's going on. It's critical to watch. There's a lot of things that, you know, we've talked about commodities before. Commodities are doing very well right now because of the tensions and what that could mean for oil prices and all the above. And so there are things that are helping to hedge against this risk, even though the stock market, anyways, in the U.S. is not really getting impacted too bad yet. Right now, that could change, but you know, again, from what we've seen so far. But what I did want to share as well is that, again, although we need to watch how this develops and possibly make some adjustments depending on what we see, it's very important when these things happen to not make the knee-jerk reactions, because you can look backwards at any of these significant events in history, and especially more in the recent history. And generally, the markets, you know, over, you know, a week or a month or, you know, even 6 months, the event itself is very hard to say actually had much of an impact on the markets longer term. Obviously, we see it in the day-to-day, right? Again, a lot of volatility this week, but even this week, markets, again, as of yesterday anyways, were flat or slightly up, even with all this tension going on and the concerns about how it escalates. So I did want to put that in perspective. And again, this is not about this event in particular, but if you look historically, really, a large number of these, events that were really concerning and did have longer term impacts, to be clear, 9/11, for instance. If you looked a little bit further down the road, the markets actually, I wouldn't say it had a clear adverse reaction over the longer period of time there. So I think that's important to note. Again, it's very concerning. It's something to watch very carefully. And obviously emotions are very high when we talk about these things because we're curious about what that means for ourselves, our families, our health, all the above. But in terms of the markets, it's not to ignore it, but just be aware that sometimes these things have these knee-jerk reactions and don't necessarily play out the way one might think going into it, right? So I just want to kind of share maybe a cautionary tale there because again, it's very easy to react to these things and it may be important to make adjustments. So don't take this the wrong way, but to do it just on this alone can sometimes turn around and bite us. And it's important to just make sure we're being disciplined, that we're looking at these changes from a very thoughtful perspective. And if there are changes to be made, they're done for the right reasons, not because of the tensions and the escalation of emotions and all the above. So I hope that helps. Again, it's something we are watching very, very carefully and we'll continue to keep you updated. But the main story so far is be cautious of reacting too quickly. And then the other thing that we're really watching, of course, is how this either does or doesn't escalate with, others getting involved and the like, as well as what happens with the Strait of Hormuz, which, is why we're seeing, I think, some of the oil prices jump up quite a bit as well. So hopefully that helps for a starting point. Again, we will continue to come back to this, though. And the longer this goes, of course, the more that it may suggest, some further conversations and what we may need to look at there. So I hope that helps. We look forward to seeing you here next Thursday. Again, we'll cover basically jobs and inflation. In the meantime, have a great upcoming weekend, and we'll see you next Thursday at 3.